Hello there, I'm Ariolax, and I will be recording tonight with the deck that I ended up playing at Pro Tour Origins. I was 7-2 with this deck before conceding the last round, and okay, so I'm going to be honest. We played this deck, and after round one, we thought we had made a terrible metagame choice. And it turns out we had, and the deck is still that good. I went 7-2, Brad went 7-2, same thing, scooping the last round. Steve Rubin was 6-3 before being scooped 2 in the last round. Seth Manfield went 6-3-1. Chris Fennell went 7-3 with the deck. I think Jerry Thompson was 6-3 with the deck before getting scooped 2. I might be off by one on that. He may have been 5-4, but like this deck was really actually just good. And it's not shocking. Red Green Devotion was, or Green Red Devotion was the best deck before people came up with innovations to the Pro Tour, and it's still really good. And it's not good because it's well positioned. It's just good because it's powerful. To go through some of the, I've kind of laid this out into, it's really linear, by the way, the 3 different piles. So you've got mana, you've got mid-range threats, you got big whammies. And it turns out that Polukranos does both of the mid-range and big whammy thing. So 15 mana dorks, including Shaman. Shaman was kind of the innovation that we had for this event. Instead of Courser, which really doesn't do a lot in the deck. It doesn't add mana. It just doesn't do anything. In testing, there's just a lot of times you're like, oh, I'm going to hit my land, and then I don't, and then I lose the game. And I want a thing to do with that. Shaman just always does exactly what you want it to. It adds 2 mana, plays a Tarka, and then when you draw it late, you just kind of make their life total equal to the number of creatures in play, which is usually conveniently less than the amount that you can attack them for. Worth noting with Rattleclaw Mystic, there's a lot of morphing this card in this deck. The 2 mana jump is pretty huge. Like a lot of draws where common draw would be like Caryatid into Temple plus Morph Rattleclaw into Unmorph play a Tarka on turn 4. It's that easy. The mid-range threats, Whisperwood is probably the most powerful. Protects you from sweepers. And really, in this deck, it's not like the Green-White Devotion deck where this is doing a bunch of stuff. It's really just effectively drawing you more cards until you find an 8/8 dragon and kill them with it. It's somewhat difficult to kill your opponent with this card. It's not like the biggest body, but it just finds you the thing that makes it really easy to kill them. Death Mist Raptor's okay. It's just a creature. However, unlike Courser, this just a creature actually holds off aggression. It gives your Rattleclaw's utility in the late game too to be able to recur the card. It's probably the most unexciting card in the deck, but it does enough work that it stays, and it's pretty important to a lot of the sideboard games. Xenagos, just great. Ramps you into a Tarka. If you just play this on turn 3 on the play, you usually just kill your opponent with Satyrs, even without the mana. You have Anissa in the main. You just want another threat, and this one conveniently adds a 16th sideboard card. It's just really powerful. And untapping your forest comes up a lot. There were times we were testing up to 3 of this card because we thought it was that good, but it just kills really fast. Just make a 4/4 attack, make another 4/4 attack. Like, even if you just have to tap 5 mana and make a 4/4 the first turn with this card, and it's a tapped land, and the next turn you make another 4/4 that's dead in 2 turns after it hits the board. It's effectively a 10 power creature if not interacted with. And that's, so one thing worth mentioning is that this card is really huge when playing against the random combo decks of the format. I played against Jeskai Ascendancy. If you just play this card on turn 3, they're dead on 5. It's really hard to beat that if your deck is spending a bunch of time setting up. It's a bit easier for the Rally deck to beat it, but still difficult. Polukranos, very conveniently biggest early threat you can play against red. Very hard for them to beat. They always have to trade 2 cards, and usually it's like 2 cards and an attack step, which is huge. And then the Monstrous is kind of one of your big games. You can just Monstrous for a bunch, kill their creatures, attack. These cards don't have a ton of depth to them. I'm not going to lie. It's just a big creature that uses your mana to make itself bigger. Dragon Lord Atarka, you play it, they lose all of their permanents. You attack them twice and they lose the game. Again, very straightforward. Genesis Hydra, you can only play 4 Atarkas, so you're willing to pay 9 mana for them. It turns out that that card is still pretty good at that cost. I'm not going to lie, I feel like every time I Genesis Hydra into Atarka, the 7 mana, the 7/7 body on the Plant Hydra just didn't matter. I just killed them with an 8/8 Trample Flyer. Uh, as for the lands, you will notice there are 0 rugged highlands. All our lands are good. There's no fourth Nykthos we don't want to draw to ever. Instead, we have a Rogue's Passage. It turns out that sometimes you do need to find something to do with a 7/7 Hydra or, well, usually a 7/7 Hydra. And this card is something to do with those. You attack them for 7, and they die very quickly. 4 Temple of Abandon, even though it comes into play tapped, or enters the battlefield tapped. Sorry, that's my 2000 showing there. It's just good. Scrying is very powerful. It turns out that spending your first turn to scry is worth it. So who would have thought that adding a free one at the start of the game would make things broken? So this is actually, for the record, going to be the first time I play this deck without the Vancouver Mulligan rule, where you have to keep your hand without getting to peek at the top card of your deck and getting a free shot at whatever you need. Which is just, the rule's just absurd, especially for this deck, because if you look at, there's so much redundancy. You have 15 copies of, you effectively have 15 copies of one card, 15 copies of another card, and then 7 big drops. And like every time you scry, you're just like 1 out of 4 to hit the card. Oh yeah, and all these lands too, 24 lands. There's literally 3 pieces in your deck. You open up your hand, you say, oh, I have 2 lands. You've mulled to 6. You've got, okay, I've got 2 lands, 2 mid-range threats, and a Dragon Lord Atarka, and something else. Okay, I'll scry. Not a mana creature, ship it. Draw, mana creature. Easy. It's so easy to assemble your nut draw with this deck because of that rule. And I'm honestly interested to see what it's like playing without it, because I'm going to have to keep some interesting hands. Another note, the 12 basics plays into moving to the sideboard. The wonderful Trail of Mystery plan. So unfortunately, I did have to cut one of these to find room for some of the new cards. But this card is great. I hope to show it off. It does just some really stupid stuff. You just get to these game states where you're just like, morph a creature, get a land, pass. And they're like, oh, great, they're tapped out if it's a Den Protector. But if it's Deathmist Raptor, and they're like tanky, and then you attack the next turn, it's just like a Rattleclaw Mystic. You unmorph it for them. Morph another creature, get a land. They kill 2 creatures like with the Languish because they're a control deck. It's like a Deathmist Raptor and a Rattleclaw. You morph a Den Protector, get a land, flip it up, get back your other thing, get back your Deathmist, put it into play face down, get another land. And like 3 turns later, they're like, you don't have any land in your deck. Nope. You have like 5 more mana than I do. Yep. And you just still have creatures. Yep. And there's nothing they can do at that point. You literally outgrind Abzan, which is the deck that is designed to outgrind people in this format, just solely on the back of this card. It's also worth noting that it survives Tragic Arrogance, which is a pretty big deal, because that's one of Abzan's best tools against this deck, is just cast Tragic Arrogance and mop up the mess. Den Protectors play into that plan. They're also pretty huge. You get to do a lot of the old Snapcaster thing post-board. You don't want to main because you're just, game 1 you're assuming your threats are just going to kill them. You don't want to like mess around with like flipping your thing, getting something back. But post-board you're playing against more answers and you're playing to your own answers. And Den Protector is both good at making your opponent repeatedly answer the threat that's worse for them to answer, which is, overloading their sideboard cards, and then making your sideboard cards become more powerful. So you can get back your Unravel the Aether and kill their second Ensoul Artifact or whatever. So this card just comes in quite a bit just to maximize your other sideboard slots. Another Nissa, just to race and against control, again, making, lands. It's less powerful with Languish around and less Perilous Vaults, but it's still really good. Just still really good to make multiple threats with a single Planeswalker, kill them fast. Crater's Claws, mostly for racing. It has some utility at killing creatures against red decks. It's really important in the mirror because in like X percentage of the games where someone doesn't have an Atark, basically the mirror comes down to this. You either get a Target out of the game, or you have a Tarka parity at like 1 or 0, and the board just kind of stalls forever. And then you draw your Crater's Claws, and then you cast it targeting them, and you have like 47 mana in play, and then you add 2, and that's still more than the life total. It's also really good against Rally the Ancestors because they tend to bog up the board, and at some point you have to sneak through with a flyer or a Rogue's Passage or somehow, and this usually can do the trick. It's also good against Abzan, very importantly because it clears out, like, if they stick an Elspeth, that's actually a problem, because, so like one of the things about Abzan is that you're like really managing threats against them, and trying not to overextend and like making them run out of answers and making their answers bad. And one of the ways they can kind of punish that is making an Elspeth and just making tokens. And Den Protector helps against that, but there are points where you have issues clearing the tokens out of the way, and this just kills the Elspeth straight up, and then gets looped with Den Protector to kill them later. We have the anti-aggressive card. So Roast is actually also for Abzan. It's the best thing against Siege Rhino. One of the ways they actually kill you. So there's two things that this does to prevent them killing you. So with Tragic Arrogance and Languish, it's actually very possible for them to go Beatdown because they're not actually extending into their own sweepers that they have to play, and they can just like selectively remove your threats as you play them. And it's pretty hard to block like Siege Rhinos. So this takes care of that. And also takes care of Corsair, because the other way they beat you is just drawing extra cards every turn. And they end up with just always having an answer and always having the mana to do all the stuff they need, like deploy Threat Answer in a turn. So if you can clear their Corsair, it's actually kind of difficult for them to get to the point where they can do things without dying. So this card's really good there. Also fine removal spell against every other, like, red or whatever. We used to have... So there used to be a third Trail, a second Creator's Clause, and 3 Rending Volleys in the deck. And as the result of Jeskai not really having too big of a presence at the Pro Tour, there were a few copies in the 7-3 bracket. But it wasn't that big of a showing. Same with Esper Dragons. I have reacted to new decks, Red and Artifacts. So the Thopter deck, you want to use Unravel. It's important to kill. You can take out Ghostfire Blade. You take out Ensoul Artifact. You're really just using this to stem the damage before this card hits, at which point they lose the game. You will notice a trend where I do a lot of things to play this card, and then your opponent loses the game. This card is just very, very dumb. It was very funny rereading the... This is like one of those cards where you go back and you read people's comments on it when it was previewed, and you're like, oh man, these are great now that I've played against it. It's like... It's the Red-Green Cruel Ultimatum. They lose all their permanents, and then they die 2 turns later. So all you have to do is live till you cast it, and that's what this card does. They got a Whirler Rogue, it's all dead. They got really just anything, it's all dead. And there's only 2 Disciples because I think that matchup's actually okay. You have a lot of reasonably costed threats that can clog up the board against them. You can get overrun, it happens, but if you ever trigger Whisperwood, it gets really, really hard for them to break through, even if they do Stoke the Whisperwood. And Disciple is just kind of like fudging the numbers a little up in your favor. Actually, Roast might be more important to prevent them. The real way they win is by killing your threat, attacking, killing your threat, attacking. And that process of attacking every turn is how they're gaining their advantage, not any other way. And so if you roast their creature, it's actually kind of difficult for them to kill you. But Nylea's Disciple is just like a reasonable hedge. So I'm interested in seeing how this deck does without the Mulligan rule, as I said. I'm really interested in just casting more Dragonlord Atarka because it's really fun and your opponent has no fun, which is even more fun. So, yeah. And I really hope I get to activate this card at least once tonight on the Formidable ability. I did not get to do it, or no. Did I do it at the Pro Tour? I think my opponent conceded first, but I definitely messed up at the Pro Tour, played the wrong creature on turn 3, and should have been able to activate this card on turn 5. And I'm looking forward to making up for that.